The first indication something had gone catastrophically wrong came not from the radios crackling across Central Command's operations floor, but from the sudden, unnatural silence that followed. Major Rebecca Voss stood rigid at her station, headset pressed against one ear, the other hand hovering over the communications panel, as if physical contact might resurrect the voices that had simply ceased to exist. 47 seconds prior, callsign Titan 4 had been transmitting routine patrol updates over Helmand Province. Now there was nothing, not static, not interference, just the kind of quiet that precedes congressional hearings and flag-draped caskets. Titan 4, come in. Titan 4, acknowledge. Voss's voice carried the controlled tension of someone who had lost friends before and refused to lose another. The operations center, normally a symphony of overlapping chatter and keyboard clicks, had contracted into a pocket of held breath. On the main display, Titan 4's transponder blinked weakly, barely visible against the topographical relief of the Registan Desert. 8 Marines. 1 A-60 Black Hawk. Somewhere below that digital marker, reality was significantly worse than data suggested. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale crossed the floor with the measured pace of a man calculating odds he didn't want to speak aloud. His eyes, dark and perpetually exhausted, fixed on the same screen Voss was studying like it held answers instead of coordinates. "How long?" he asked. 90 seconds since last contact. Emergency beacon activated 17 seconds ago. Voss's fingers moved across her console, pulling up satellite imagery that refreshed with agonizing slowness. Last reported position puts them in a canyon system, 12 miles southwest of Fob Shank. QRF is spooling up, but they're looking at a 40-minute flight time minimum. 40 minutes. In combat mathematics, that was a lifetime, several lifetimes. Hale's jaw worked silently. He'd been in country long enough to know what Taliban forces could accomplish in 40 minutes against a downed helicopter crew. The calculus was brutal and simple. Someone needed to get there first, and that someone needed to carry enough ordnance to make a difference. His eyes shifted to the airfield status board, scanning the available assets. 2 Apache gunships undergoing maintenance. 3 F-16s configured for high-altitude interdiction, useless for danger-close support in a canyon. 1 AC-130 tanking up for tonight's mission, minimum 2 hours from operational. Then his gaze landed on the single designation that made him hesitate. A-10C Thunderbolt II, callsign Viper 7, status, ready, pilot, Captain Alina Cardoza. Hale's hesitation lasted exactly 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than he could afford. "Get me Cardoza," he said quietly. The name hung in the air like an undetonated ordnance. Everyone in the operations center knew Alina Cardoza, not because she was exceptional, though her flight record suggested otherwise. They knew her because 13 months ago she'd been the pilot that came back when her wingman didn't. Because the investigation had cleared her of wrongdoing but not of whispers. Because at 38, she was flying missions that pilots half her age considered suicide runs, and doing it with the kind of silent intensity that made people uncomfortable. Some said she had a death wish. Others said she was trying to prove something. Voss suspected the truth was simpler and sadder. Cardoza was the only one who still believed she deserved to be there. Captain Alina Cardoza received the alert in the pilot-ready room, a converted shipping container that smelled of industrial coffee and stress sweat. She'd been reviewing gun camera footage from yesterday's sortie, analyzing her strafing runs with the methodical precision of someone who understood that survival in an A-10 wasn't about glory. It was about angles, timing, and the willingness to fly lower than any sane person would consider. The Thunderbolt II, affectionately and accurately called the Warthog, wasn't designed for elegance. It was designed to absorb punishment and deliver apocalyptic amounts of firepower, which made it perfect for pilots who'd stopped caring about their own mythology. When her radio chirped with Hale's direct summons, Cardoza was already moving. She grabbed her helmet, survival vest, and the battered flight jacket that bore the faded insignia of her previous squadron. The jacket was technically against regulations. She'd been reassigned after the incident, but nobody had the heart or the authority to make her remove it. Some symbols mattered more than rules. The walk to her aircraft felt longer than usual. The flight line stretched before her, shimmering in the 112-degree heat that turned the Afghan afternoon into something viscous and oppressive. Viper 7 sat at the far end, canopy already open, ground crew swarming around it like ants tending their queen. The A-10 was an ugly aircraft by any aesthetic standard. Utilitarian, blunt-nosed, with its massive GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon jutting from the nose like a medieval lance. The twin engines mounted high on the fuselage gave it a hunchbacked appearance that designers had never bothered to streamline. But to Cardoza, it was beautiful in the way a war hammer is beautiful, purposeful, honest, lethal. She climbed the ladder with practiced efficiency, settling into the cockpit that had become more familiar than any home she'd ever owned. Her hands moved through the pre-flight checklist without conscious thought, flipping switches and checking indicators while her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Lopez, secured her harness. Lopez was 24, built like a linebacker, and possessed the kind of optimistic energy that Cardoza found simultaneously exhausting and necessary. "Heard it's a hot one, Captain," Lopez said, his voice carrying through her helmet's open mic. "Grid coordinates are already loaded. They're saying Titan IV is in deep." Cardoza's response was economical. "Then we get them out." Lopez finished the harness check, his hand lingering for just a moment on her shoulder, a gesture somewhere between respect and worry. Then he was descending the ladder, pulling the chocks, giving her the clear signal. The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, a sound that always reminded Cardoza of something angry and hungry waking up. She ran through final systems checks while receiving her departure clearance, her voice flat and professional on the radio. "Tower Viper 7, ready for immediate departure, emergency tasking." The tower's response was instant. "Viper 7 tower cleared for takeoff runway 27, winds 270 at 15, altimeter 3012. Godspeed." Godspeed. People only said that when they knew you might not come back. Cardoza advanced the throttles and felt 11 tons of titanium-armored aircraft begin to roll. The A-10 wasn't fast. Maximum speed barely broke 400 knots, but it was relentless. She rotated at 120 knots, the nose lifting with deliberate authority, and climbed into the brutal Afghan sky. Below, the base disappeared into a geometry of sandbags and concertina wire. Ahead, somewhere in the mountains that serrated the horizon like broken teeth, 8 Americans were running out of time. The flight to Titan IV's last known position took 14 minutes that felt like hours. Cardoza kept her aircraft low, below 8,000 feet, skimming over terrain that rose and fell in violent geological arguments. Through her canopy, Afghanistan sprawled in shades of tan and brown, beautiful in its hostility, ancient in its indifference to the small human dramas playing out across its surface. She'd flown over this country so many times that its geography had become internalized. She could navigate by the shape of ridgelines, by the specific way valleys carved through plateaus. Major Voss's voice crackled through her helmet. "Viper 7, Ops. Titan IV's emergency beacon is still active. Coordinates uploaded to your navigation system. Be advised, last intelligence suggests heavy Taliban movement in that sector. Estimate 20 to 30 hostiles, possibly more." "Copy that, Ops. Time on station." Cardoza's eyes scanned her instruments while her peripheral vision tracked the terrain rushing below. Flying an A-10 required a strange bifurcation of attention, part of her brain managing the aircraft, part of it calculating weapon solutions for targets that didn't exist yet. "QRF is wheels up in 6 minutes, 40-minute flight time to target. You're their guardian angel until then." Guardian angel. The terminology made Cardoza's mouth twist into something that wasn't quite a smile. She'd stopped believing in angels around the same time she'd stopped sleeping through the night. What she believed in was the 600 pounds of ammunition in her GAU-8, the 11 Maverick missiles hanging from her wings, and the titanium bathtub surrounding her cockpit that could absorb small arms fire like it was rain. The mountains rose ahead, and Cardoza descended further, down to 5,000 feet, then 4. This was the dangerous altitude, where the ground could reach up and kill you if you miscalculated, where shoulder-fired missiles became viable threats. But it was also the altitude where the A-10 excelled, where she could see targets with her own eyes and put ordnance on them with devastating precision. She banked around a ridgeline and entered the canyon system, her aircraft's shadow racing across stone that had witnessed 10,000 years of human conflict. Then she saw the smoke. Black and oily, rising from a narrow valley floor like a funeral pyre, the smoke marked Titan IV's grave. Cardoza's stomach clenched with a familiar combination of dread and fury. She pushed the nose down, descending into the canyon with controlled aggression, and her world contracted to what she could see through the canopy. The Black Hawk was on its side, rotors shattered, fuselage crumpled. Around it, in a defensive perimeter that spoke of training and desperation, she could see figures in desert camouflage. They were alive for now. Surrounding them, closing in with the patience of predators who knew their prey was trapped, were the Taliban fighters. Cardoza could see them moving between rocks, coordinating their approach, assault rifles held ready. This wasn't a probe. It was an execution being organized. She keyed her radio. Titan IV, Viper 7 is overhead. Hold tight, I'm about to make some noise. The response came back immediately, the voice young and scared and trying desperately not to sound either. Viper 7, Titan IV actual. We've got 3 wounded, limited ammunition. They're coming from the north and east. We need immediate. The transmission cut off as gunfire erupted below. Cardoza didn't wait for permission or clearance or any of the bureaucratic rituals that peacetime aviation required. She rolled inverted, pulled the nose through the horizon, and dove toward the northern approach where the heaviest concentration of hostiles was advancing. Her targeting computer locked onto movement. Her finger found the trigger, and she spoke 2 words that had become her personal prayer. Guns, guns. The GAU-8 Avenger is not a weapon that fires bullets. It's a weapon that erases problems. When Cardoza depressed the trigger, the 7-barreled rotary cannon spun up to 4,000 rounds per minute, each 30-millimeter round a mixture of high explosive and armor-piercing depleted uranium. The sound was distinctive, a mechanical roar that people who'd heard it never forgot, like a dragon clearing its throat. The effect was biblical. Where Taliban fighters had been advancing, there was suddenly nothing but dust and destruction, and the kind of silence that follows overwhelming violence. Cardoza pulled up, banking hard left, her G-suit squeezing as she maneuvered for another pass. Through her canopy she could see the survivors on the ground, could imagine their relief, their disbelief, their sudden rekindling of hope. The A-10's reputation preceded it. When that distinctive silhouette appeared overhead, when that gun started singing, everyone on the ground knew the calculus had changed. Titan IV targets north are neutralized. Where else? East Ridgeline, they've got heavy weapons. Cardoza was already turning, already scanning. There, halfway up the canyon wall, partially concealed behind an outcropping, she spotted the technical, a pickup truck with a mounted machine gun. The crew was rotating the weapon toward the downed helicopter. It would shred the Marines' defensive position in seconds. She armed a Maverick missile, waited for lock tone, and fired. The missile streaked away trailing white smoke, impacted with precision that seemed almost personal, and the technical ceased to exist in a fireball that echoed off the canyon walls. In the operations center back at base, Major Voss watched Cardoza's gun camera feed with something approaching reverence. Lieutenant Colonel Hale stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Around them, the watchstanders had abandoned their stations to crowd around the main display. "She's in the canyon," someone whispered. "Actual walls on both sides." Flying an A-10 in a canyon was considered borderline suicidal. The aircraft's low speed made it vulnerable to ground fire from multiple angles. The restricted maneuvering space meant any hit could be fatal. There was nowhere to go but up, and up meant exposing yourself to every weapon in the valley. Standard doctrine was to attack from standoff range, minimize exposure, preserve the asset. But standard doctrine hadn't been written by someone watching Marines die in real time. Hale's voice was quiet. "She's not coming out of that canyon until they're extracted or she's out of ammunition." Voss didn't respond. She was watching Cardoza line up another gun run, watching her fly lower than any pilot should, watching her put her aircraft between the Taliban and the Marines with a deliberateness that transcended duty. This wasn't tactical excellence. This was something else entirely, something that scared Voss because she recognized it. Cardoza wasn't trying to survive this mission. She was trying to atone for something. On the ground, Titan IV Actual, Marine Captain James A-10, was reorganizing his defensive perimeter with the frantic efficiency of someone who'd just been granted a reprieve from death. His radio operator was wounded but functional. His medic was performing triage on 2 Marines who'd taken shrapnel in the crash. One of his riflemen was unconscious with a suspected spinal injury. They'd survived the initial crash through luck and training, but the follow-up attack had been systematic and brutal. Without Cardoza's intervention, they would have been overrun in minutes. Now, with the A-10 circling overhead like an angry guardian, they had a chance. A-10 watched the aircraft bank hard, impossibly low, threading between canyon walls with precision that seemed computer-generated. Except computers didn't fly like that. Computers didn't put themselves in harm's way for ground pounders they'd never met. "Who is that?" his medic asked, looking up from his work. "Who's flying that thing?" A-10 checked his tactical display, reading the call sign. "Viper 7, Cardoza." The name meant nothing to the medic. He was 22 on his first deployment and hadn't been in-country long enough to know the stories. But A-10 had been here for 8 months. He'd heard the whispers in the mess hall, the careful way people talked about the female A-10 pilot who flew missions nobody else wanted. Some said she was reckless. Others said she was the best close air support pilot in theater. A few said both things were true. Watching her work, A-10 decided the truth didn't matter. What mattered was that she was here, and she was keeping them alive. Cardoza had entered a state of consciousness that she recognized from previous engagements, a kind of hyperfocus where time dilated and every input, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, became crystalline. She could feel the aircraft's responses through her hands, could anticipate the terrain's challenges before they manifested, could see hostile movement in her peripheral vision, and calculate firing solutions without conscious thought. This was the space where training became instinct, where the boundaries between pilot and aircraft dissolved. She'd already expended 60% of her GAU-8 ammunition and 3 Mavericks. The Taliban forces, initially aggressive, had become cautious. They knew what an A-10 could do. They'd seen their friends turned into pink mist, but they also knew basic mathematics. Eventually, she'd run out of ammunition. Eventually, she'd have to leave. They just had to wait. Except Cardoza had no intention of leaving. "Viper 7 Ops, QRF is 22 minutes out. Can you maintain station?" Voss's voice carried a question she wasn't quite asking. "Are you still operational? Are you still thinking clearly? Are you going to survive this?" Cardoza's response was clipped. "Affirmative, maintaining station. Hostiles are repositioning for another push. I'm tracking approximately 15 to 20 still active." What she didn't say was that her fuel was becoming a concern. The A-10 had excellent loiter time, but combat maneuvering burned fuel exponentially faster than straight and level flight. She had maybe 40 minutes before she'd need to head back. The QRF would arrive with 22 minutes to spare, unless something went wrong, unless the Taliban got smart, unless the universe decided that today was the day Alina Cardoza's luck finally ran out. She pushed the thought away and focused on the present. Below, the Marines were consolidating their position. Above, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of copper and gold. In different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. In these circumstances, it was just a countdown timer. Darkness would change everything. Titan 4, Viper 7, give me a perimeter assessment. Akoi's voice came back steady. North and east are secure for now. We're seeing movement to the south, looks like they're trying to flank around the crash site. I count 8 hostiles, maybe more in the rocks. We don't have enough ammunition to hold if they coordinate an assault. Cardoza banked south, searching. The Taliban fighters were learning. They were using the terrain better, moving in smaller groups, making themselves harder targets. She spotted 3 men sprinting between cover points, their movements practiced and efficient. These weren't conscripts. These were experienced fighters who'd survived years of American air superiority by being smarter than their dead friends. She armed another Maverick but hesitated. 9 missiles left, 22 minutes until QRF arrival. If she expended all her ordnance now, she'd be defenseless if the Taliban mounted a final desperate assault when they heard the rescue birds approaching. But if she didn't suppress them now, they'd be in position to devastate the Marines. The decision took 2 seconds. She fired. The missile streaked downward, impacted among the rocks where the fighters had taken cover, and the problem ceased to exist. 8 missiles left. In the operations center, Colonel Hale made a decision he'd been avoiding. He picked up the secure phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. It was answered on the first ring. "This is Hale at Bagram. I need to speak with General Mattis." There was a pause, some muffled conversation, then a voice that sounded like gravel being poured into a steel drum. "Hale, what's the situation?" Hale explained in economical sentences. Downed helicopter, Marines in contact. Single A-10 providing close air support in a canyon. Pilot operating at the edge of acceptable risk. QRF inbound but time critical. He didn't mention Cardoza by name. He didn't need to. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Then, "This pilot, she volunteering for this or you ordering her?" "She volunteered before I could order her, sir." Another pause. "Then let her work and Hale make sure she gets home, whatever that takes." The line went dead. Hale replaced the handset and returned his attention to the gun camera feed. On screen, Cardoza was threading through the canyon again, her aircraft impossibly low, her focus absolute. Voss looked at him questioningly. "General's aware," Hale said simply, which meant if this went sideways, the consequences would reach all the way to the top, which meant Cardoza's actions today would either end her career or define it. There was no middle ground anymore. Cardoza's fuel gauge was becoming insistent. She had 32 minutes of flight time remaining, which was more than enough to return to base, but less than optimal for combat operations. The QRF was 19 minutes out. The mathematics were getting tight. Below, the situation had stabilized into an uneasy stalemate. The Marines held their perimeter. The Taliban held the high ground and the numbers advantage. Cardoza held the ability to annihilate anyone who moved. As long as this balance maintained, everyone survived. But balances were fragile things. Viper 7, Titan 4, we're hearing vehicles. Multiple engines approaching from the west. Cardoza's blood went cold. Vehicles meant reinforcements. Reinforcements meant the Taliban was committing serious resources to this fight. They wanted these Marines badly, either as propaganda victories or as bargaining chips. Either way, her mathematics had just gotten significantly worse. She banked west, climbing slightly to get better visibility over the ridgeline. There, dust plumes rising from a dirt track that wound through the mountains. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, technical trucks probably armed, moving fast, 10 minutes out, maybe less. She keyed her radio. Ops, Viper 7. I've got reinforcements inbound to hostile position. Multiple vehicles heavily armed. Recommend expediting QRF arrival. Voss's voice came back tight. Viper 7, QRF is already maximum speed, 18 minutes. Can you interdict the vehicles? Cardoza ran calculations. The vehicles were still on the approach road, separated from the main battlefield. If she hit them now, she'd burn through her remaining Mavericks. But if she let them arrive, they'd bring heavy machine guns, possibly RPGs, definitely more personnel. The Marines wouldn't survive that kind of escalation. The decision wasn't really a decision. Engaging. She rolled inverted again, pulling the nose down until the vehicles were centered in her heads-up display. The lead technical was racing along the dirt track, throwing up a rooster tail of dust. She waited for lock tone, fired. The Maverick streaked downward, impacted the lead vehicle, and transformed it into a fireball that tumbled off the road. The second vehicle swerved, trying to avoid the wreckage, and lost traction. It rolled twice before coming to rest upside down. The third and fourth vehicles braked hard, their drivers suddenly reconsidering their tactical situation. Cardoza didn't give them time to reconsider. She fired again. Another impact. Another fireball. The surviving vehicle reversed course and fled back the way it had come, deciding discretion was preferable to martyrdom. 6 missiles left, 17 minutes until QRF. Titan 4, reinforcements are no longer a problem. Okoy's response sounded like a prayer. Copy that, Viper 7. You're keeping us alive down here. That's the job, Marine. Cardoza's voice was flat, professional, but something in her chest had tightened. These weren't abstract targets. These were Americans who would go home to families, to lives, to futures. Because she was here. Because she'd been fast enough, ruthless enough, skilled enough. For the first time in 13 months, the weight she'd been carrying felt slightly less crushing. In the operations center, the mood had shifted from anxiety to something approaching awe. The watchstanders were tracking Cardoza's engagement with the kind of attention usually reserved for sporting events. Every gun run, every missile fired, every impossible maneuver was met with held breath and muttered commentary. Voss found herself simultaneously inspired and terrified by what she was witnessing. She's flying like someone who doesn't care if she makes it back, she said quietly to Hale. Hale's response was measured. She's flying like someone who cares more about those Marines than herself. There's a difference. Is there? Because from here it looks like the same thing. Hale didn't answer because he didn't have a good answer. He'd seen pilots crack under pressure, seen them freeze, seen them find excuses to avoid danger. He'd also seen pilots transcend their limitations, seen them access reserves of courage and skill that existed somewhere beyond training. Cardoza was demonstrating the latter, but the line between transcendence and self-destruction was thinner than most people realized. On the ground, the Taliban forces were making a tactical adjustment. They'd lost their reinforcements. They'd lost their initial assault force. They'd lost the element of surprise. But they still had numbers and they still had time. The sun was getting lower. Shadows were lengthening. In darkness, that A-10 would be significantly less effective. If they could just hold position until nightfall, the odds would shift back in their favor. Their commander, a veteran fighter named Wahid who'd survived 3 years of American airstrikes, watched the A-10 circle overhead with professional respect. This pilot was good, better than good. The aircraft's movements were precise, controlled, lethal, but no pilot could maintain that level of intensity indefinitely. Everyone made mistakes eventually. Everyone's concentration lapsed. He just needed to wait for that moment. He keyed his radio, giving orders to his surviving fighters. Hold position, conserve ammunition, wait for darkness, and be ready to move when the A-10 finally left or made a mistake. The Americans were injured, low on ammunition, and trapped. Time was on his side. What Wahid couldn't know, was that Alina Cardoza had stopped thinking about time 13 months ago when her wingman died. She'd stopped calculating odds the day she decided that some missions mattered more than survival. She'd stopped worrying about mistakes when she realized that perfection was the only acceptable standard for keeping people alive. Wahid was waiting for her to become human again. But Cardoza had left her humanity back at base, locked in a footlocker with her doubt and her fear, and all the other things that would get Marines killed. Viper 7 Ops, QRF is 15 minutes out, current fuel state. Cardoza checked her gauges. 28 minutes, tight but manageable. What's QRF composition? 2 Black Hawks with a platoon of Rangers, plus 2 Apache escorts. They'll extract Titan 4 and provide suppressive fire for egress. Copy. I'll maintain station until Apache arrive, then I'm Winchester. Military terminology for out of ammunition, though in Cardoza's case it would be more accurate to say out of fuel. She had 6 Mavericks left, but they were useless if she couldn't stay airborne to employ them. She continued her orbit, eyes scanning the canyon for movement. The hostiles had gone to ground, which was tactically sound but strategically concerning. They were waiting for something. Darkness. Reinforcements. A mistake. Whatever they were planning, she needed to disrupt it before the QRF arrived. The most vulnerable moment would be when the Black Hawks descended to extract the Marines. If the Taliban timed an assault for that window, people would die. Cardoza made a decision that violated every doctrine she'd been taught. She descended lower, down to 3,000 feet, then 2. She was now below the canyon rim, boxed in by stone walls on both sides, flying at a speed that would be considered a stall for any other aircraft. The A-10 could handle it. The Warthog could fly at 140 knots if necessary, but that was irrelevant. What mattered was that she was now extremely vulnerable and completely committed. But she was also terrifying. The sound of her engines echoed off the canyon walls, amplified and distorted until it seemed like multiple aircraft. The psychological impact was immediate. Taliban fighters who'd been preparing to reposition suddenly hesitated. That A-10 wasn't just overhead anymore. It was among them, hunting them, daring them to move. In the operations center, someone gasped. She's below the ridgeline. She's actually inside the canyon. Hale's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the console. This was insane. This was brilliant. This was exactly what the Marines needed and exactly what gave commanding officers ulcers. If Cardoza took a hit now, she had nowhere to go. No altitude for recovery. No maneuvering space. She'd just auger in and become another casualty statistic. But the Taliban didn't know that. All they knew was that death was circling at eye level, and anyone who moved would be erased. Wahid watched the A-10 pass his position less than 500 meters away, close enough that he could see details. The weathered paint, the nose art, a coiled Viper with the inscription "Second Chances." The pilot's helmet moving as she scanned. Close enough that if he'd ordered his men to open fire, they might have inflicted damage. But he didn't give that order, because he recognized what he was seeing. This wasn't suppressive fire or tactical air support. This was a message written in jet fuel and ammunition. I will kill every single one of you before I let you touch those Marines. And Wahid, veteran of countless firefights, believer in causes worth dying for, pragmatist who'd survived when idealists hadn't, made the calculation that survival was worth more than propaganda. He keyed his radio and gave the order to withdraw. His fighters, relieved to have permission to retreat, began melting back into the mountains. They moved carefully, expecting the A-10 to engage, but Cardoza let them go. She'd achieved her objective. The Marines were secure. The QRF could extract without opposition. Mission accomplished. She climbed out of the canyon, ascending to a safer altitude with fuel that was now critically low. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline catching up with her now that the immediate crisis had passed. She keyed her radio. Ops, Viper 7. Hostiles are withdrawing. Canyon is secure for QRF insertion. Voss's voice was thick with emotion she was barely controlling. Copy that, Viper 7. QRF has visual on your position. They're beginning descent now. You are cleared to RTB. Return to base. The words should have been a relief. Instead, Cardoza felt the familiar emptiness that followed successful missions, the hollowness of surviving when others hadn't, the guilty knowledge that she'd gotten to be a hero while somewhere else, someone was getting a folded flag. She turned west, toward Bagram, toward the real world, toward whatever came next. Below, the Black Hawks descended into the canyon with Apache gunships circling protectively. Rangers fast-stroked down, securing the perimeter while medics rushed to the wounded Marines. The extraction was textbook, fast, efficient, professional. Within 8 minutes, everyone was airborne and heading home. Titan IV's crew would survive. They'd tell their stories. They'd mention the A-10 pilot who'd kept them alive. Some of them would try to find out her name to thank her properly. But Cardoza would be gone before they could. That's how she preferred it. Gratitude made her uncomfortable because it implied she'd done something special when the truth was she'd just done what any pilot should do. That her methods were unorthodox, that her risk tolerance was alarming, that her commitment bordered on suicidal. These were details she didn't dwell on. What mattered was the mission. Always the mission. She landed at Bagram 23 minutes later, fuel gauges reading nearly empty, adrenaline finally crashing into something close to exhaustion. Staff Sergeant Lopez was waiting at her parking spot, and his face was different somehow. It took her a moment to identify the expression. It was respect. Pure, uncomplicated respect from someone who knew exactly what she'd done. "Hell of a mission, Captain," he said as she climbed down from the cockpit, her legs unsteady. Cardoza just nodded. Words were difficult. She could fly through a canyon at 200 feet and engage multiple targets simultaneously, but small talk defeated her. She signed the maintenance forms, conducted a cursory post-flight inspection, and walked toward the ready room. Behind her, ground crew was already swarming over Viper 7, counting bullet holes, assessing damage, preparing her for the next mission. The operations center was chaos when she entered. Watchstanders surrounded her immediately, voices overlapping with congratulations and questions and the kind of hero worship that made her skin crawl. She pushed through them politely but firmly, heading for Hale's office. The colonel was waiting, his expression unreadable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. Cardoza sat. Hale studied her for a long moment. That was either the finest piece of close air support I've seen in 20 years or the most reckless flying I've ever witnessed. Possibly both. Cardoza said nothing. She'd learned that silence was safer than explanations. 8 Marines are alive because of you. That matters, but you flew at altitudes that would get any other pilot grounded. You expended ordnance in a canyon with minimal escape routes. You exposed yourself to enemy fire repeatedly." He paused. "What were you thinking?" For the first time, Cardoza met his eyes directly. "I was thinking they needed help, sir, and I was in position to provide it." "At what cost?" "Whatever cost was necessary." Hale leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "Captain Cardoza, Elena, I need to know you're not trying to get yourself killed out there." The use of her first name was unexpected, intimate in a way that military formality usually avoided. Cardoza felt something crack in the careful walls she maintained. "I'm not trying to die, sir. I'm trying to make 13 months ago matter. I'm trying to prove that." She stopped, the words catching. "That it wasn't your fault," Hale finished gently. Cardoza's jaw tightened. The investigation had cleared her. The accident report had cited mechanical failure, not pilot error. But paperwork couldn't absolve guilt, couldn't resurrect the dead, couldn't change the fact that she'd been flying lead when her wingman's aircraft suffered catastrophic engine failure and augured into the Afghan landscape at 400 knots. She'd watched it happen. She'd been helpless to prevent it. And every mission since had been an attempt to balance an equation that could never be balanced. "It doesn't matter what I think," she said finally. "Those Marines needed close air support. I provided it. That's the job." Hale nodded slowly. "It is the job, but you're no good to anyone if you burn yourself out or get killed chasing redemption." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Get some rest. Debrief with intelligence at 2200. And Cardoza, what you did today, it won't bring him back, but it matters. Don't forget that. She left his office feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously. Lighter because someone understood. Heavier because understanding didn't change anything. The mathematics of guilt were immutable. Word spread quickly through the base. By evening, everyone knew about